My name is Sabrina Whitaker, and I was 32, the night my family decided I existed only to fix their problems. We were crammed around my grandfather's old dining table in Indiana when my older sister leaned back in her chair, looked past me like I was air, and said, almost laughing, "Some people just need to feel needed, even when they clearly aren't." The room didn't go completely silent, but the noise changed. Forks slowed. Conversations thinned. It was like everyone agreed without a word that we were all going to pretend she wasn't talking about me while staring right at me. I felt every pair of eyes land on my face. Mom's quick glance, the tight little smirk curling at the edge of my sister's mouth, the way my grandfather's gaze stayed on his plate but never really missed anything. I had been the extra paycheck, the emergency contact, the quiet solution for so long that they honestly believed I would swallow this too. Instead, I raised my glass and smiled. "Perfect," I said. "Then I'm not." I set the glass down, pulled out my phone, and opened the one app nobody at that table ever thought I would touch. 2 taps and a confirmation screen later, the account that kept my sister's little world from collapsing wasn't doing that anymore. 5 minutes after I slipped my phone back into my bag, her expression shifted. Her jaw actually dropped. Mom went pale in a way mascara couldn't hide. Granddad finally looked up. "Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel." By the time I got back from Indiana, the silence in my apartment felt heavier than usual. On paper, what I did at that table was simple. I took away a payment I never should have been making in the first place. In real life, it had taken years of being the dependable one to get there. The dependable daughter, the dependable sister, the one who could be counted on to show up, cover the gap, smooth things over so no one else had to change. I am the younger sister by 3 years. My older sister, Jocelyn Whitaker, had always been the center of my mother's universe, even when we were kids. Back then, it showed up as little things. Who got the new shoes? Who got the last piece of dessert? Whose excuses were forgiven? As adults, it turned into something more expensive. Instead of extra cookies, Jocelyn got extra chances. Instead of an apology, I was expected to offer solutions. My mother, Deborah Whitaker, makes a point of saying she raised us on not very much, which is her way of explaining why she still acts like survival depends on keeping everyone happy. She talks about loyalty like it is the same thing as obedience. She wraps guilt in concern, and if that does not work, she reminds you how tired she is, how much she sacrificed, how ungrateful it would be to tell her no. Her husband, Andrew Parker, slid into this story a few years ago. He is not a bad person in the dramatic way people like to hear about online. He is the kind of man who floats. He will stay in a job he hates, in a house he cannot afford, in a marriage that is eating him alive, as long as somebody else keeps the bills from catching fire. With my family, that person has always been me. When my sister had her first child, the conversation about help sounded reasonable. Daycare in their part of the state cost more each month than my first apartment. They were behind on everything already. My mother called first, then texted, then called again. She never asked me directly to pay for daycare. She just painted a picture of my niece's future as if it depended entirely on whether I stepped in. By the time the second child was old enough for the same preschool, it was not a conversation anymore. It was a system. I set up the automatic payment once, as a temporary solution. I told myself I would do it for a few months. 3 at most. Long enough for them to find a cheaper option or pick up more hours or make some kind of plan. Months passed. Nothing changed. The daycare drafted its tuition on the first business day, like clockwork. Every time I saw the withdrawal in my banking app, a little note attached to the transaction reminded me whose kids I was paying for. It stung, but it was easier than waiting for the late-night phone calls I knew would come if the payment failed. Easier than listening to my mother describe imaginary consequences in a shaking voice until I caved. Deborah never said, "You owe us." She did not have to. She would send pictures of the kids at school and write little captions about how lucky they were to have family who stepped up. She would talk about how hard things were for Jocelyn and Andrew, how they were doing their best, how some people were dealt a tough hand. The implied line was always the same. If I refused, I would be the one turning my back on those children. It did not matter that I lived in a smaller place than they did. Skipping trips, delaying repairs, and saying no to things I wanted so tuition would clear on time did not seem to count for much either. In our family, the story was simple. Jocelyn struggled. I succeeded. Therefore, I helped. That story worked for everyone but me. Sitting alone after that dinner, I could feel the weight of every quiet yes I had ever given. All the times I drove over with grocery bags so my niece would not hear the word no at the store. Every extra shift I picked up so the next month would not be a crisis. All the little ways I had trained them to believe I would always catch the fall. They were not villains in the movie sense. They were just used to me being the net under their tightrope, invisible until the moment they needed it. They did not have to look down. They never had to wonder what it cost. I did. By day, I managed projects for a logistics company, the kind of job where every delay comes with a spreadsheet and a number. I know exactly how much an extra hour of overtime is worth, how long it takes to rebuild a savings cushion after you dip into it, how quickly one late payment can snowball into 3. I could track the daycare tuition in neat columns, see it stack up month after month, and still feel trapped by a story that said family meant paying first and asking questions later. Most of my coworkers assume I am good with money because I say no to happy hours and impulse trips. They do not see me pausing over my own online cart, talking myself out of a weekend away or a replacement for the couch I have had since college. They do not hear the way my mother's voice echoes in my head when I think about buying something just for myself. The tuition I canceled that night was not just a number on a screen. It was the line between being part of a family and being treated like an institution. When my sister made that comment at my grandfather's table, she did not see the hours of my life tucked into those payments. She did not see the dinners I skipped or the savings I postponed. She saw a resource. She saw a role. For years, I tried to pretend that was enough for me. The days after that dinner did not explode the way you would expect. Nothing dramatic happened in my living room. No one showed up at my door with tears or suitcases. The first wave came the way most things in my family do now, through my phone. My mother called before I even finished the drive back from Indiana. I let it ring. When she called again, I turned the volume down and watched her name light up the screen until it stopped. A few minutes later, a text came through, long enough that the preview cut off halfway. I did not open it. I already knew the rhythm. It would start soft, then sharpen. By the next morning, there was a stack of missed calls waiting for me, along with 3 new messages, all from her. One mentioned my sister's kids. One mentioned how thin the margins were for people who did not have my job. The last one asked what had happened to the girl who used to care about family more than money. None of them asked why I had been the one paying in the first place. I went to work on time, just like always. My projects did not pause for family drama. Shipments still needed to move. Drivers still needed route updates. Every time I set my phone face down on my desk, another vibration rolled through. I did not pick up. If I gave my mother even a sliver of space, she would wedge herself in and start rearranging the facts. Around lunch, I stepped outside, not to call her back, but to breathe. I scrolled through the notifications. Missed calls, voicemails, a new text. This time from my sister. She did not bother with greetings. Her first message was a paragraph of outrage, typed without commas, about how I had humiliated her in front of our grandfather. She said I had blindsided her. She said normal people did not make financial threats at family gatherings. She said she could not believe I would take it out on her children. I read it twice. Not because I was shocked by what she said, but because it was so familiar. The same story, told again. She was the victim. I was the weapon. My refusal to keep paying was not a line, it was an attack. I did not answer. An hour later, a shorter message followed. It said, "You are not really going through with this." No question mark. Just a statement that assumed I would fold. For years, I had. I locked my phone and went back to my desk. The first voicemail I listened to that week was not from my mother or my sister. It was from my grandfather. His voice was slower than I remembered from childhood, but it carried the same careful weight. He said he did not want to interfere. He said he had watched things pile onto my shoulders for a long time. Then he added that sometimes the only way people learn to stand is when the ground under them stops feeling so safe. He did not tell me what to do. He did not ask me to explain myself. He just said he understood. And that was more shocking than any of the angry messages. That night, I finally opened one of my mother's texts. It was a wall of words. She described the kids' routines at school, how attached they were to their teachers, how a disruption could set them back. She reminded me how hard it had been for her when we were small. She wrote that she could not sleep thinking about what would happen if my sister lost their spot at the daycare. The whole thing was built to land on one line near the end. "I know you would never let it get that far." I stared at that sentence for a long time. It was not a request. It was a belief. In her mind, the situation was already solved because I was the kind of person who stepped in before the worst part. For the first time, I texted back something that did not fit the script. I wrote that I was not changing my mind. I wrote that I had helped for a long time, longer than I ever promised, and that it was time for them to find another plan. I did not explain beyond that. Every extra word would have become a tool she could use to pry. The reply came fast. She told me I was being cold. She told me I was letting money harden my heart. She said she had not raised me to be this way. I put the phone face down again and let the message sit there, unanswered. A small bright square on the table. 2 days later, my sister raised the stakes. Until then, she had kept our argument in private channels. That afternoon, she shifted to the family group chat, a place usually reserved for birthday photos and holiday plans. She posted a long message about some people forgetting where they came from. She praised the idea of relatives who step up without needing credit. She never used my name, but she did not need to. Everyone in that chat knew who had stepped up and who had just stepped on. A few cousins reacted with little heart icons, more out of habit than conviction, I guessed. No one tagged me. No one asked for my side. For a few minutes, I felt 12 years old again, standing on the edge of a room while adults talked around me as if my presence made me part of the furniture. Then a second message appeared, this one from my grandfather. He did not write much. He never does. He simply replied under my sister's speech with a single sentence. "Sometimes loving your family means letting them learn on their own." The chat went quiet after that. I put my phone away and sat with the strange feeling of having someone on my side, even quietly, even from a distance. By midweek, I went to work, kept trucks and timelines moving, then came home and set my phone on the counter like it might go off in my hands. The screen lit up with names I knew by heart. I let each call roll to voicemail without hearing my mother's voice. She did not get quieter. One message focused on the grandchildren, another on how hard it was for my sister to juggle everything, a third on what people would think if the children had to change schools. Different words, same point. I was supposed to fix this. My sister stayed silent for almost 2 days. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, she sent a short message that did not look like the others. "We need to talk. Today. In person." There was no apology, no hint of compromise, just urgency. I stared at it in the glow of my computer screen and tried to decide whether meeting her was a mistake. Not going would mean more messages, more calls, more attempts to drag other relatives in. Going meant walking into whatever speech she had rehearsed. I told her I had an hour after work. She picked the place without hesitation, a strip of parking spaces across from the preschool where her children spent their days. She wanted the building in the background, the sound of kids on the playground, every prop she could get. The sun was low when I pulled in. Parents were buckling toddlers into seats, carrying art projects and backpacks. I parked at the edge of the lot and turned off the engine. For a few seconds, I just sat there, listening to the noise on the playground and my own heart thudding in my ears. My sister's car was already there. She leaned against the hood with her arms folded, eyes on me as I stepped out. There was no hug, no small talk. She went straight for the wound. "I cannot believe you did that," she said. "At Granddad's table, in front of everyone." Her voice carried just enough to reach me and no farther. To anyone walking by, we probably looked like two sisters having a tense but ordinary conversation about pickup. I did not answer right away. The old version of me would have started explaining, filling the silence with context, apologizing for how things looked. This time, I let the pause stretch. "You humiliated me," she said when I did not rush in. "You made my life a spectacle. Do you know what Mom said after you left? She said she did not even recognize you." There it was again, the idea that I had turned into someone unfamiliar, as if all the years of quiet help were the real me, and this resistance was the mask. I told her I had not wanted a scene. I told her I had made a decision about my own money. I kept it that simple. "Your own money," she repeated. "Like their tuition is not your concern? Like you are not part of this family?" Behind her, a teacher opened the preschool door and waved a child toward a waiting parent. The ordinary sweetness of it made my sister's words feel heavier. This was the picture my mother always painted when she wanted something. Children at a doorway I was supposed to hold open. My sister stepped closer. "You know what happens if that payment does not go through again," she said. "They start looking at other families for the spots. They move us down the list. We lose our place. Do you really want to be the reason your niece has to start over somewhere else?" Every part of her argument assumed the same thing, that my job was to absorb the consequences of her decisions so her children never had to feel them. It sounded noble when my mother said it. Standing in this parking lot she had chosen as a stage, it sounded like what it was, an expectation. I told her calmly that it was her responsibility to make sure her children were taken care of. Not mine, not our mother's, hers and her husband's. I did not raise my voice. I did not list the months I had already paid for, or the nights I lay awake doing math instead of sleeping. I just stated the boundary. She looked at me as if I had started speaking another language. "You can afford it," she said. "You live by yourself. You do not even have kids. What are you hoarding it for?" It was an old line, one she and my mother had both used in softer forms over the years. This was the first time I heard it without padding. I told her I was not hoarding anything. I was paying for my own life, which was more than enough. Choosing not to fund her choices was not an attack. It was a correction. "So that is it?" she asked. "You are just going to watch us drown?" I thought about all the times I had thrown out life preservers before she even noticed the water rising. Late payments covered without a word, groceries bought, transfers sent again and again. Somehow, in her mind, none of that was evidence that I cared. It was just background noise. I told her I was not watching her drown. I was stepping out of the pool she kept dragging me into. We stood there for a minute, the gap between us wider than the few feet of asphalt. My sister shook her head like she had reached some sad conclusion about my character. "I do not even recognize you," she said again. Mom was right. I did not point out that for the first time in years I recognized myself. When I got back into my car, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was not my mother or my sister. It was a name that rarely appeared on my screen unless something serious was happening. My aunt, Kathleen Morris, had sent a simple message. "Call me when you have a minute. It is about your mother." By the start of the next week, the consequences stopped feeling theoretical. An email from the preschool landed in my inbox. The subject line was polite and firm. It mentioned an outstanding balance, a late fee, and the possibility of losing enrollment if the account was not brought current soon. My name sat at the top as the billing contact, even though I was no longer the one paying. I stared at it for a moment. The tone was gentle, but the meaning was clear. The safety net they took for granted was gone, and now the people actually responsible for the bill had to feel the ground under their feet. I forwarded the message to my sister and my mother without comment. No explanations, just a subject line that said, "This is not mine anymore." Minutes later, my phone buzzed. I did not recognize the number, but the area code matched the preschool. I stepped into an empty conference room before answering. A director with a calm voice asked if everything was all right. She said they had noticed the payment method on file had failed, and because my contact information was still attached to the account, they wanted to make sure they were speaking to the right person. I told her I was no longer responsible for tuition, that the parents would be handling it from now on. Saying it out loud to someone outside my family felt strange and solid. She thanked me and said they would follow up with my sister directly. By the time I walked to my car after work, there were several missed calls from my sister and one from my mother. I sat in the driver's seat and watched the screen light up again. This time, I answered. My sister's voice hit my ear at full volume. "They called me at work," she said. "In the middle of my shift. Do you know how that looks? Do you know how it feels to have them say there is a problem with tuition?" I told her it probably felt like what I had felt every month watching the withdrawal come out of my account, hoping nothing else bounced. She did not hear that. She jumped straight to the daycare's warning. Spots were limited. Families waited for openings. If they did not pay soon, someone else would take that space. She said the word space like it was a birthright, not something rented 1 month at a time. "It is one payment," she said. "One. You can cover 1 more month while we get things sorted. After everything you have already done, what difference would it make?" The difference, I thought, was that this time she knew exactly what she was asking. There was no pretending the bill had gone away on its own. The email, the phone call, the possible consequences were all laid out where she had to look at them. I reminded her that I had already said no. I told her the school was speaking to the right person now. There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. "You really are serious," she said. "You would rather see us scramble than lift a finger. You have turned into someone I do not even recognize." She hung up before I could answer. Later that evening, a text from her husband appeared. His messages never came with the same heat. He wrote that things had been tight, that they were behind on more than just tuition, that he was trying to pick up extra hours. He asked if there was any way I could help them bridge this just once more, so the kids would not have to change anything. I read it carefully. Beneath the wording sat the same assumption. Any crisis touching those children belonged automatically to me. I typed out a response that was longer than it needed to be, then deleted most of it. In the end, I wrote that I hoped they found a solution, but I could not be part of it. I hit send and turned my phone face down on the table. That night, my mother called again. When I let the call go to voicemail, she shifted to the family group chat. She did not name me, but she described grown children who forget who carried them when they were small, and people who would rather hang on to a bank balance than keep a family stable. A few relatives added sad face emojis. No one addressed me directly. My grandfather did not reply. Instead, my Aunt Kathleen sent me a separate message, a line asking if I was free to talk later about something she had been holding on to for a while. I told her I would call the next day. Meanwhile, my sister sent one more message, not to me, but to the group. She said they were looking into legal options and that they would do whatever it took to protect their children. The words were heavy, but the threat was hollow. You cannot drag someone into court for refusing to continue a favor they never owed you in the first place. What struck me most was the silence that followed. No one rushed in to cheer her on or echo her anger. The next morning, I woke up to a reminder from my calendar. The tuition draft date had passed. For the first time in nearly 2 years, there was no matching withdrawal from my bank account. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my budgeting spreadsheet. The numbers were not dramatic. There was no fortune, just breathing room. Enough to fix the slow leak under my sink without planning it 3 paychecks ahead. Enough to think about a weekend away without hearing my mother's voice in the back of my mind accusing me of selfishness. Somewhere across town, my sister was confronting a different set of numbers, a due balance instead of an invisible gift, a deadline she could not push on to me, a choice between cutting back, picking up more work, or facing the change she had been using as a threat. For the first time, I was not standing between her and the impact. Next evening, I called my aunt. Kathleen answered before the first ring finished, like she had been waiting with the phone in her hand. After a quick hello, she asked if I was alone. When I said yes, something in her voice shifted. "I do not want to stir things up," she said, "but I cannot keep watching this. You should know why your mother is so determined to lean on you." I told her to go ahead. "Last fall," she said, "your mother asked me to come over and help her sort mail. There was a pile of unopened envelopes on her table. One of them was already open when I got there. It was from an insurance company, about a policy your father took out years ago. My father had been gone for a long time. I thought everything tied to him had already been handled. He listed both you and Jocelyn on it," she said. "It was not millions, but it was more than a little help. Enough to clear some things, enough to buy time." The letter spelled out both shares. Your mother had already signed the back of the check. My stomach dropped. I asked why no one had told me. "Because she told me not to," my aunt said. "She said if you knew about it, you would insist on doing something practical with it. She said that would make you the villain for not letting her take care of her girls in her own way. She promised she would use part of it for the kids and save the rest." The picture formed quickly. A policy meant for both daughters. A check cashed quietly. Phone calls to me afterward, full of empty hands and urgent needs. "Do you know how much it was?" I asked. She named a figure. It was not life-changing, but it was solid. Enough to pay more than a year of preschool tuition. Enough to wipe out the balance on the credit card my mother always described as a monster. Enough to make all those midnight calls to me unnecessary. "What did she actually do with it?" I asked. "I know she put some in the bank," my aunt said. "I saw deposit slips. I saw a few upgrades around her house. I heard her say she could finally breathe, but I also listened to her still talk about how she had nothing, how she needed you to keep stepping in." That is when I started to feel sick about staying quiet. Kathleen paused. "When you spoke up at your grandfather's dinner," she said, "I watched your mother's face. She did not just look shocked that you stopped paying. She looked afraid you had found out." Her words rattled around in my chest, colliding with every memory of my mother sobbing over bills she swore could not be faced without my help. Those calls had come after the check, not before. "Why tell me now?" I asked. "Because she crossed a line," my aunt said simply. "It is one thing to accept help. It is another to hide money that was meant for you, and then call you heartless when you draw a line. I could not sit through another visit listening to her tell everyone how cold you are, and say nothing." I thanked her. She apologized for waiting as long as she had. When we hung up, the air in my apartment felt different. I sat on my couch for a long time with the phone in my hand, weighing whether to call my mother. Letting it sit meant living with a new level of resentment every time her name lit up my screen. Saying nothing would keep the peace she liked, the kind where I swallowed everything. In the end, I pressed call. She answered on the second ring, already mid-sentence. "If this is about the tuition," she began, "I hope you are ready to be reasonable. Your sister is falling apart. The children." "This is not about tuition," I said. "This is about Dad." The silence on the line was instant. I talked to Aunt Kathleen, I said. She told me about the policy, about the check with both our names on it, about you signing it and keeping the money to yourself while telling me there was nothing. When my mother finally spoke, she did not deny it. She slipped straight into defense. I did what I had to do, she said. Your father trusted me to manage things. That money would have disappeared if I had handed it over. You have no idea how fast it goes when you are drowning in bills. I told her I knew exactly how fast money moved. I had been watching it drain out of my account every month to cover tuition she insisted she could not manage. She said she had used some of the money to catch up, to fix things around the house, to make sure there was a stable place for her grandchildren. She said I would have spent it on myself and regretted it later. You had more than a year, I said. In that time, you let me believe you had nothing. You let me carry your fear for you. You let me pay for something you could have handled yourself, at least for a while. And you called me selfish when I stopped. She said I was blowing things out of proportion, that I was ungrateful, that I did not understand how hard her life had been. She reached for old stories about her childhood, her struggles, all the ways the world had mistreated her, as if they were a shield she could hold up against any question. Listening to her, I felt something click into place. This was not a mistake she regretted. It was a pattern. A story in which she was always the exhausted hero and everyone else was either a burden or a resource. For years, I had tried to be the good daughter inside that story. On the phone that night, I realized I did not have to stay in it. Weeks later, the new version of my life did not feel dramatic. It just felt quieter. My mother kept trying to pull it back to what it had been. At first, she called every day, then every few days. Her voicemails swung from anger to tears. I stopped pressing play. I let the icon pile up, then deleted everything without listening through. My sister did not call at all. The next update I got came from my aunt. One afternoon, Kathleen sent a picture of a note taped near the preschool office. A spot was opening for a child on the wait list. My niece's name was not there anymore. Through family talk that drifted my way, I pieced things together. My sister had pulled both kids out and moved them to a cheaper center across town. The new place did not have bright murals or enrichment programs. It had long hours and lower fees. My mother called it a disaster. To me, it looked like what it always should have been, a choice matched to their income instead of mine. Other parts of their life shifted too. My sister traded in her car, picked up weekend shifts, and leaned harder on my mother for childcare. It was just what happens when reality stops being padded by someone else's wallet. I was not there for their arguments. I did not see the moment my sister understood that no one was coming to pick up the next bill. When my grandfather wanted everyone together, he started choosing his own house or a restaurant instead of my mother's. At one of those gatherings, he pulled me aside near the fence while kids ran circles in the yard. I am proud of you, he said. It is hard to let people carry what is theirs. The last time my mother and I spoke face to face, she came to my building without warning and stayed on the sidewalk. She said she wanted to clear the air. What she meant was that she wanted the story rewritten with her as misunderstood, and me back in place as the dependable one. She said she was sorry if I felt hurt. She said she had only kept the insurance money to protect me from myself. She said using it on her house and comfort counted as taking care of the family. She never called it mine. She never connected it to the months she had cried about having nothing. Listening to her, I could feel the old gravity of our roles tugging at me. If I accepted her version, everything that happened would shrink into one soft misunderstanding, something we were both supposed to move past without naming. I told her I loved her. I also told her I was finished being her first option when life felt unfair. I said I would not talk about her money or my sister's money with her again. If she wanted to call me, it would have to be about something that did not end in a request. She warned me I was cutting myself off from my own blood. She said one day I would need them, and they might remember this. She said I was choosing money over love. The words landed quietly. I had already spent years choosing their comfort over my own peace. When she drove away, the quiet that settled over my apartment felt different from the silence I used to dread. It did not feel like being frozen out. It felt like having a room that finally belonged to me. I changed the settings on my phone so certain numbers go straight to voicemail. I stopped opening every notification in the family chat. I started saying yes to small things I used to cancel on myself. A short trip, a class I wanted to take, replacing something in my apartment that had been broken for years. My sister and I still have not spoken. I see her name in threads I scroll past and in photos someone else posts. My nieces look fine in their new uniforms. They are learning something real. That stability depends on choices inside their own home, not on a relative covering their tuition from across town. Drawing this line did not fix my family. It did not make my mother honest or my sister grateful. What it did was put the weight of each person's decisions back into their own hands. My mother now has to live with relatives who know she hid money that was meant for her daughters. My sister has to live with knowing that the safety net she mocked came down the moment she treated it like an obligation instead of a gift. I have to live with the distance that followed. The lesson for me is simple. Generosity without boundaries turns into a slow kind of self-erasure. Help is not the same as surrender. Support is not the same as letting people outsource every consequence. If you were raised on the idea that love means never saying no, ask yourself what disappears when you keep saying yes. Your savings, your time, your sleep, your sense of being more than a solution. You do not owe anyone unlimited access to those things, even if they share your last name. Thank you for staying with me through the whole story. If any part of it felt familiar, you are welcome to share your version in the comments so someone else scrolling by might see themselves in your words and realize they are allowed to set a line too.